From London, I'm Rachel Abbott, and this is The Standard. On this special episode, we're taking you behind the scenes of a conversation between the London Standard's editor-in-chief Dylan Jones and our former UK Prime Minister, Sir Tony Blair. He discusses themes in his book on leadership lessons for the 21st century, which is published by Penguin, his reasons for focusing on leadership, and the lessons that can be learned from executive action in government. The book also looks at effective implementation of policy, assembling the right team, what works and what doesn't. They also discuss digital ID, leadership in the Middle East, and if he'd offer Sir Keir Starmer any advice. To read the full interview, pick up a copy of today's edition of the paper, or find it on our website, standard.co.uk. So, let's begin.
Why did you feel that you wanted to write a book about leadership?
Because I just think it's a very odd thing that you have books about leadership in virtually every profession.
Yeah.
But you don't have one about government, because people always treat government as if it's just politics, whereas a lot of government's about executive action, about implementation, about how you assemble the right team and devise the right policy. And you can learn lessons from what's happened around the world. Government in the 19th century was very small. But in the 20th century, it grew very big, and government's now big today. So we got a lot of experience of it. There are I think real lessons you can learn as to what works, what doesn't. And so I decided, because I study it a lot, because we do this work at the Institute, so I thought I'd try and distill the lessons.
One of the appealing things about the book is the fact you are quite self-deprecating. And you talk about your own inexperience and how that manifest itself and what you learn from the things that you experienced after that.
Yeah. In our first 5 years, we had things that we could do that didn't require deep executive action. They just required political decisions and legislation. Things like the minimum wage. The Good Friday Agreement was a negotiation, devolution, London mayor. You can remember we didn't have a London mayor. Mm. But the second 5 years was when I used the experience of the first 5 to understand how to govern better in terms of reforms of public services, how you make government work more efficiently in delivery. And, to a degree, you'll always be in a position of leadership. You learn on the job to a degree, but that degree is pretty big in my case, because I literally had not been in government before. So it took me a term to work out how to not just how to make the system move properly, but where I was never going to make the system move, and therefore had to have other methods of doing things and bringing in different people. You
have intimated occasionally, lest you be terribly misquoted, that there are periods where you miss being in office. Is that true?
Yes, but the thing is, people sort of say to you, do you miss being Prime Minister? And the truthful answer is, yeah, occasionally. But it doesn't. People then sort of take that as meaning, he wants to go back. No,
sure.
No, I don't. But yeah, of course, there are times when you miss it because it's such an important job. But I don't sit there and think about it. And anyway, it's not going to happen. So,
what's the one thing that you would have done differently when you were PM if you'd had more experience?
That was quite a lot of things. Actually, I could give you a long list of those.
I
will say in foreign policy, it would be obviously recognising post 9/11 the challenge of trying to put democracy in countries that are where there are going to be too many forces obstructing that. And in domestic policy, some of the things we were doing, which I had to leave, I had to leave before I'd finished. If we'd started them earlier, I might have got them done. I think particularly additional reforms in health. We had really good programs on social exclusion, which I think we would have, where we were focusing on what we used to call the problem families, mm-hmm. Which I still think government's going to have to return to, because it's just not true that a rising tide lifts all boats. It doesn't. There are some boats that are too wrecked to do that. And, of course, I was an advocate of sort of At that time it was identity cards, but it would now be a digital identity system, which I think is an essential part of any modern country today. And the only answer to the immigration issue, by the way. Because at any one time, you've got a large number of people who don't have a right to be here or are here, and that's the biggest problem. Biggest problem is not people actually coming in by boats, that's obviously a problem, but the biggest problem is you can come in here in 15 different ways. And at any one time, we could have 750,000 or even 1 million people here without permission. The only way you can track that properly is to know who's got a right to be here and who hasn't.
Is this something that the current administration should explore?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, in the end, they kind of will explore it because already, in health, everybody should have an electronic health record where you have all your data, your health data, in one place so that you don't have to chase around the system. Getting different doctors with different, all that information should be there and it should be yours. And you should be able to allow whatever part of the health system you go into to look at it if you want to. Countries now often today are digitizing their passports, their driving license, all of that stuff needs to get, and is being done, by the way. But, also today, it's not a method of control by government. It's actually a way of you having your own personal biometric identifier, which means, for example, you can do your private transactions, not just your public ones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this will happen in the end. It just depends how long it takes us to get there.
Let's go to the ads coming up.
What advice specifically would you give Starmer right now?
Well, I always say when people ask me this, it's not my job to give him advice. He's perfectly capable of doing it on his own.
But you've just written a book for him.
No, but I didn't write the book for him. I wrote the book for leaders. And by the way, the lessons of leadership in my view are the same whether you're running a country, a company, or coaching a football team. They're the same lessons.
We'll see you back here in just a minute.
Your book is full of advice. What advice specifically would you give Starmer right now?
Well, I always say when people ask me this, it's not my job to give him advice. He's perfectly capable of doing it on his own.
But you've just written a book for him.
No, but I didn't write the book for him. I wrote the book for leaders. And by the way, the lessons of leadership in my view are the same whether you're running a country, a company, or coaching a football team. They're the same lessons. So I'm not going to give him advice. I'm going to give him support. Which is probably more important.
What would he learn then from your book?
I think the only thing that anyone will learn who's coming into a position of leadership is that there are things to think about strategically that will help you govern better, because part of governing is about creating the right systems around you, the right organization around you. Whereas I think a lot of leaders, now this is not to do with Keir, right? This is just any leader comes into power, they don't necessarily think about becoming leader in government as an executive position. They think about it as the position of political leadership, which it is. But you learn very quickly, as I say in the book, that, to win an election, you need to be the great persuader, but to govern, you need to be a good chief executive. And it really is the skill set that is most commonly found in the private sector, actually.
Returning to the theme of the book, what's your analysis of the quality of leadership in the Middle East right now, in the various countries?
Well, when I go back to the Middle East, which I will do soon, it will be, I think I've been to Israel alone, and I go to many countries in the region. I've been over 270 times since I've left office.
Good God.
Yes, that's quite a lot. Okay. So I really, I'm deep in the detail of it, and you can look at the war in Gaza and what's happening in Lebanon today, and those are the short-term questions that need to be resolved. But the main challenge in the Middle East is really about one issue, and I think people here elsewhere in the West don't really see this, and this is the way I see it, and a lot of people would disagree with me, but this is the way I see it, is it's essentially a battle between Islam and Islamism. And Islam is the religion, Islamism is the political ideology that tries to turn Islam into a political ideology, and no religion is suited to that in the modern world. That is the central destabilizing force in the Middle East, and it comes in part from Iran, which is using its proxies all over the Middle East to try and create instability, and from the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the Sunni version of Islamism. And in the end, there is a huge desire, I think, amongst large amounts of the people, particularly the younger generation, to just move beyond that debate and to end up with religiously tolerant societies and connected economies, and that's what they need. And I remain wedded to there should be any solution in the Israeli-Palestinian issue, which is often seen as the reason for all the conflict in the region, but actually it's not. But the only solution to that is obviously to have the two peoples living side by side in peace with the two states, but we're a long way from that at the moment.
But again, talking about leadership, is that going to happen whilst Netanyahu is still in charge?
I don't think it's not about individual leaders, it's about creating the...
Well, I think people would disagree with you on that.
I know they would, but what I say to them is, right now, if you want to have and I'm a strong believer in Palestinian self-determination, the Palestinian state, but to achieve that, irrespective of who's the Israeli leader, you've got to have a unified Palestinian politics, and it's got to be unified in pursuit of the two-state solution peacefully. And the truth is, Palestinian politics has been really anchored in this split between the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah and the Hamas government in Gaza. And in those circumstances, it's very hard to see how you get the coherence that allows you to make peace.
And that's The Standard. Remember to read the full interview, pick up this week's edition of the paper, or visit standard.co.uk. This podcast returns tomorrow at 4 p.m. See you then.